So a few months ago, back when I was putting episodes of the Audiobook Club on Facebook rather than YouTube, I reached out to author Cara to see if she would like to be interviewed by myself and good friend and internet blogger Sophie Mort. Anyway, to our surprise and absolute delight, she said yes, and we interviewed her, had the most amazing chat, and she's just the most lovely and charming person ever. And I thoroughly enjoyed the experience. Anyway, put it out on into our episode and put it out on Facebook. And it hit me the other day that I haven't yet shared this interview and video on YouTube yet. And just in case anyone would like to watch the interview and see what was going on back then, I thought this video, I would include this interview. So please enjoy the Cara Hunter interview and let me know your thoughts. It was such a wonderful experience. So, Cara, thank you so much for joining us. We're absolutely thrilled to be speaking with you on the show. How have you been? How's lockdown been treating you so far?
Well, I'm very lucky. I've got a garden, and so the first time round in the summer, like a lot of people, it actually wasn't too bad in some ways. Looking back now, it's weird, isn't it? Because it had a sort of novelty value, which has totally gone now. Absolutely nobody's finding this interesting anymore. So yeah, I mean, it's just like Groundhog Day, isn't it? Which year is it even? I mean, it gets to the point where you don't know what day of the week it is. Last year, I was finishing the last edits of The Whole Truth, and found it pretty hard going, even though basically the book was there. But it was just really hard to concentrate. And I know a lot of writers who've really struggled. I mean, I know one person who's not written a thing since this whole thing started. You're just, completely blocked by it. And I do get that. And now I'm trying to write another book, and as we speak, I'm about 40,000 words into it. And it's good, it's fine. I mean, I'm very lucky I've got a job I can do at home. And, in some ways my life hasn't changed very much because I work a lot at home on my own. But in other ways, because you can't do anything, you can't meet your mates, you can't go on holiday, you don't feel that you've got any treats lined up as well, which is what I always really look forward to. And normally I'd be writing now, but I would have come off a lovely summer where I'd have gone away, and I'd have come back and thought, right, okay, down to work, but yeah, none of that happens. So. But anyway, I'm managing. I know I'm a lot better off than a lot of people, so I'm not.
It's that thing, isn't it? As soon as you're told that you're not allowed to do something, even if you had no plans to do that before, that's the only thing you ever want to do.
I know exactly. It's like my cats. The one thing that they want to do is the thing that you don't want them to do.
Absolutely.
I'd love to kind of start at the beginning. Have you always wanted to write? Did it ever even seem possible becoming a professional author?
Well, I've always loved reading. I've always loved books. I did English at university. And so, I think for some people that puts them off becoming a writer because they've become somewhat, as it were, daunted by how good other people are. But there's a flip side to that as well, in that you learn a lot. You learn a lot about how to put a book together and how to develop character and, the various pieces of mechanical apparatus that a writer has at their disposal to deal with. So I don't know, first person versus third person, or, flashback versus present tense, and all of those things. So you do learn a bit about it, even if you're not trying to write yourself at that time. And then I just went and got a job like everybody else. And to start with, I was in finance. So I wasn't even really working with words at all. And then eventually ended up working in PR, and I was doing a lot more writing, and I became a copywriter. So it's sort of, I was edging back towards it, if that makes sense. But it didn't really happen until I went freelance, because I didn't have enough time. And I think that's why I think that, the thing that, the famous thing that Virginia Woolf used to say about a room of your own in which to write, but it's also time of your own. And if you're doing a full-time job, and, remember the days of people commuted to work? Yeah, is that ever coming back? But certainly I was commuting, and that takes another, hour either end of the day or more. And I just didn't have time. But once I became freelance, it's one of those jobs where it's feast and famine. You're either completely ridiculously busy or you're in a down patch. So gave me the time to try, and the rest is history, I suppose.
So moving on from that, from when you were writing, so we have to talk about the overwhelming reaction to Close to Home. So when you're writing something like that, when you were writing it, did you ever get a sense that you were on the edge of something just huge, or is it something you can't really judge until it's out there?
I had a feeling it was probably okay. I think I've written enough now to know when a book is singing, and sometimes you get the feeling it's running away with you, and that's always a really good sign. If that's happening, then yeah, you're probably onto something. Doesn't mean it's perfect, no book ever is, but it means it's got something. It's got some sort of momentum in it. I did think the twist was pretty good, even though I say it myself, and no spoilers, I won't talk about that, but that's the first thing that came to me. And I remember thinking, okay, yeah, that might work. And then, of course, it was, as it were, I was constructing the book backwards in some ways, in that I had to create a story that would lead up to that twist. And the thing I always want with twists at the end of my books is I want the reader to react, or the listener to react in two ways. First of all, to go, oh my God, but very, very quickly after that to say, but of course.
Yeah.
Of course it was that. So I don't want them to feel hoodwinked by the twist or deceived by the book. You don't want someone turning out to be a murderer who's only appeared on 3 pages from the end, because everyone feels cheated by that. So you don't want that. You want them to feel that even if they didn't see it coming, they can now see it makes sense. So I had to create a story in the first book where it would actually do that. It would be something that would make sense at the end, even though people weren't expecting it. So that led to the whole family dynamic thing, which I'm very interested in. And as you may know from the other books, I'm really interested in family dynamics, especially dysfunctional families. And then I thought, well, okay, so someone's going to be investigating this. So we're going to have a police angle, even if it's not a fully fledged police procedural, it has to have an investigatory strand. So that's where we ended up with Forley and the team. And I definitely didn't know it was going to turn into a series. I didn't even know it would necessarily even be published. So I certainly didn't sit down and say, right, I've got these characters, and over the course of 27 books, they are going to do I know there are some people who actually do that. I heard someone once say before he wrote his first book, he already had a plan for all 10 of them. I thought, crikey, that's an act of faith, isn't it?
I think as a reader, a reading fan, and an audiobook fan, etc. I think the thing that I marvel most at is how authors such as yourself are able to plot so perfectly and almost lead like this trail of breadcrumbs that it leads up to an inevitable ending that you never saw coming. And it's that twist that you spoke of where you're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that was it. And then you think, oh no, of course, because everything was leading up to that.
Yeah.
I think especially if you go and read the material again, you're able to then see more of them.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, obviously, books like I write, crime books, very rarely get read a second time. It's not that sort of a book. But I love the idea that if someone did read it a second time, some people have, then they'll say, "Oh, I didn't realise, I didn't see that bit," or, so which is lovely. But in terms of plotting them out, yes, I'm a really serious plotter. I have, by the time I actually start writing properly, I've got a synopsis that could be 30 pages long. So it's actually scene by scene. It doesn't start that long. It starts as a paragraph, and then it starts to grow, and eventually, you've got a scaffolding for the whole book. Doesn't mean things don't change as you go along, but at least I've got like a safety blanket and say, yeah, I know where I'm going. But a lot of those really delicious little Easter eggs that you're talking about go in right at the end, because things have changed. And then you're doing your reads and rereads at the end, and then you realize, I could just pop that in there, and it's the most delicious bit of the whole process, is going back and putting down the Easter eggs, and I love doing that. I mean, that's when a book becomes huge fun to do. First drafts are always drudgery, but what they say, it's not about getting it right, it's about getting it down. So you just have to grit your teeth and say, right, here comes another 1,000 words and another 1,000 words, I will eventually get them.
Absolutely.
I actually found your books through audiobooks. Do you listen to audiobooks? Do you enjoy them? Have you got any particular favorites?
Yes, I do. I do like to listen. I do audiobooks. I also do podcasts, which I think a lot of people do now as well. And yes, it's. I think it's a really nice way of doing it, especially I think with a series as well. A lot of people say about the 40 books that they're really into the narrators because it's the same every time. So they really like Lee Ingleby doing Adam and Emma kind of doing the other narration. So I think there's a great deal of comfort around that it's something that they're used to. So yeah, and we're very lucky actually with Close to Home. Penguin really pushed the boat out and they actually did a full cast of it, as you probably know. So I think there's actually 37 voices in the first one, where they obviously there's the professional actors, and then it was really lovely because they opened it up to people in Penguin who wanted to come along and read a voice, because the Twitter voices are all different people. So people were just turning up and saying, "Can I do one?" And I'm in there as well. It's my Hitchcock moment. I'm one of the people in there.
Great. What do you think it is about an audiobook version of a book that sort of makes it accessible to new listeners? Do you think it's the performance aspect of it? Do you think it's maybe the added sense of the story? What have you got any thoughts on why perhaps audiobooks have definitely grown in popularity over the last decade or so?
No, I think it's a really good question. I think there's probably a practical answer to that, and as it were, an emotional one. I think the practical answer is you can take them with you wherever you're going. You can do other things, so because we're all like this, we're always doing 8 things at once, aren't we? And double screening all the time and all of this. But yeah, it means you can be in the gym, or you can out for a walk or whatever, and still listen. And I think the practical side of it is immense, and I think that's probably why podcasts have grown as well, for exactly the same reason. But also I think the emotional side is you do get that the resonance of the human voice, and you can feel closer to a character if it's coming to you in speech perhaps than in words. Some people prefer to read and have their own imagination of what the person sounds like, but others obviously really, really like having a professional actor give that extra layer of poignancy or emotion or whatever. But I think that's probably a lot of it.
Well, speaking of actors, I am very excited for the television adaptation. That was a good little segue.
Well done. I like it.
How does something like that happen? I mean, is there anything that you can tell us about it?
Well, it was complete closed book to me. See what I did there. Complete closed book to me beforehand. I knew absolutely nothing about it. You essentially, as a writer, you have an agent, obviously, but they will generally only handle the print and audio, but the print and audio bits of the book. They will normally have a specialist either within their own agency, or they'll have a partner agency who do the film and TV side, because it's a very, very different set of contacts. It's a very different type of world. So that was the case with us. My agents had a partner agency, and then they will take the books to production companies, essentially, because that's the way it's done. You don't go direct to the likes of ITV or whatever. It's a production company that has to make it. So you go to them, and then once they've taken it on, and they'll buy an option, and that's the way they do it, because they don't know whether they're going to be able to sell it on. So the production companies essentially don't have huge pots of money to make things. They have to have a contract with a network in order to be able to then put the thing in process. So you'll get a small amount of money up front, just as an option, because obviously they've got to stop you going and selling it to somebody else while they're trying to put together their pitch documents. So they sort of put you on hold for a while they do that, and then obviously you wait until they've gone to the network, got the contract, and then you get into the stage of actors and all of that. But we're not quite there yet.
So exciting.
It really is, because we've got a wonderful screenwriter on board. I don't know, you may have seen, I tweeted and put it on Instagram, but Daisy Coolum is our screenwriter for it, and she writes Grantchester, and has also written things like Deadwater Fell, which is her own work, and and she's fabulous, not only hugely successful and talented, but she's so nice as well. So I'm looking forward to actually meeting her. I mean, I've only met her on Zoom at the moment.
I think that can just so improve any process of working with people that are not only obviously talented and where they're at, but also just working with people who are just nice to be around.
Yeah, you're right. And I think that's one of the things they're saying about this whole sort of Zoom experience that we're all having, that it's putting different types of stresses on relationships at work. And a lot of people are saying quite rightly that it's not too bad for keeping relationships going when you already have one, so it's someone you knew before, but it's actually quite difficult to build a team or bring in new people because they've never had a chance to interact with each other any other way than this, which is pretty artificial. So yeah, it's hopefully we won't have to do it for that much longer.
I second that. I hope so too. So when it comes to writing sort of police procedurals, obviously you paint quite an accurate picture. Do you have any particular sources that you go to when referencing like sort of procedural?
It's a good story here, because to start with, when I first wrote the first version of Close to Home that went to publishers, I hadn't spoken to anybody apart from all I'd done was internet research, and it's amazing what you can find if you really go looking. And obviously I watch loads of true crime and crime drama, so I suppose it sort of went in by osmosis, some of it. But no, I hadn't spoken to anybody. To be honest, I didn't really feel able to go to try to contact a busy police officer who's doing a really difficult, challenging job, and say, look, I'm a would-be writer, could you spend loads of time going through my book with me? And I just didn't feel able to do that. I didn't feel it was justified. So I went in with my agent to meet the wonderful woman who's now my editor at Penguin, and one of the first things she said was, this feels so authentic, you must have spoken to so many police officers. So I sort of put my hand up, so abashed, and said, actually, I haven't spoken to anyone. And so she laughed her head off and then said, well, I think you need to find yourself a tame policeman. And I thought at that point, yeah, actually now is probably the time. So through a friend of a friend, I met up with, he's now a DI. He was an inspector at the time, but he'd been a detective sergeant. So he had a lot of CID experience, and he's in Thames Valley as well. And he used to work in this area that I live in. So he knows the city and everything. And he's really nice and really helpful. And I've learned a lot from him. And I also managed to find, through a friend of a friend, somebody who used to be a practicing CSI. Oh, wow. He's brilliant. He's also terrifying. I mean, some of the stories he's told me, and I'm thinking, oh no, I could not put that in a book. I really could not put that in a book. And he's, if I ask him about things like effects of injury or something, he'll send me photographs, and he, pay him not to send me the photographs. But no, it's brilliant because he knows exactly how you would approach a scene, and he's told me some stories which have ended up in the books, just little side things about like the type of humor they have when they're working in a morgue, which isn't something you really would assume, but any way of getting through it, I suppose.
It's so fascinating to speak with these people, these experiences, and yeah, as you say, like the humor for people in jobs that you wouldn't necessarily think so, but of course they would. The human beings, you have to. You've got to find a way. You've got to find a way of dealing with it. So yes, he is fascinating, and he's one of the people that I would talk to quite early on in developing a story as well. I mean, other advisors that I have, I bring them in later once there's something they can actually look at. And Andy, the police officer, is usually at that stage rather than too early, But Joey, the CSI guy, so much now depends on forensics and DNA that there's absolutely no point putting a huge synopsis together, never mind actually writing something, when a CSI would demolish it in 5 minutes flat. You get to the crime scene and say, oh, well, that's it. It's not a story anymore. Yeah. So I have to talk to him early and say, would this actually work? Has it ever happened to your knowledge? And the loveliest moment of all is when I say something like that and he says, I've never seen it, but yeah, you could do it. And that actually happened with The Whole Truth, which is the one that's coming out next. The great big sort of, as it were,
forensic moment in that book was one of those, which was really great.
I'm so excited. I can't wait. I'd love to kind of talk about your at-home setup. Obviously, everyone is working from home right now.
Mm.
Do you give yourself a daily word count or a set amount of hours to write? I mean, are you always writing, first of all? I find it quite hard if I don't feel inspired to sit down and write. So I can imagine if it's your job, that could be quite difficult.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Because I was a copywriter before, I suppose I had the luck of, as it were, training without knowing I was doing that, but training myself that this is a commitment. This is I have a deadline, I have a promise I've got to keep to, and I can't afford, as a copywriter, you can't afford to sit there having writer's block or just staring at a blank screen. You've got to do something. So I sort of trained myself to write through the blocks, as it were. I always use the analogy of a snow plow. You push and push and push, and it's still not working. You go back and you try a slightly different angle, and you just keep going. You will eventually get through. It may not be the most perfect solution, but once you've got through, you'll be able to circle back later and play with it. So yes, I'm quite disciplined. I tend to write quite early-ish in the morning, from about 9ish through to about 2 or 3, and then I get tired and it gets not very good, so I stop. And I usually don't set myself word counts, but I am at the moment, which is sort of a reflection on lockdown, that it's not feeling as much fun as it has in the past, and therefore I'm saying, okay, you've got to just keep going. And if I can tick off, like I said, that 1,000 words at a time, or whatever it is in the day, then at least I feel I'm getting somewhere, and we'll get to the point in the process which is more fun.
So apart from writing bestsellers, what can you find Cara Hunter doing on an average weekday?
Right now, not a lot.
It might be a little bit harder to answer in lockdown.
I'm just teasing. I go for walks. I watch loads of crime on TV. I told you that, didn't I? It's my guilty pleasure. I watch it all the time. But my husband teases me, but now he doesn't, because he says, research, which actually is what it is, because I've lost count of the number of times where I've got something from having watched something on TV, perhaps a year before, or it may even just be a tiny nugget. It's not a whole story. That doesn't happen, but it's a tiny nugget, a tiny fact, something that surprised you. And I find that a plot will evolve by a sort of clustering process, i.e. you have one idea and then another idea from over here, and then another idea from over here, and then suddenly they start to, as it were, stick together, and it's the combination that makes it interesting, or a new twist. So and that stuff can come from anywhere. So that's why I'm such a magpie. I think a lot of writers are. You just need to keep shoveling stuff in your brain, and eventually that magic cluster moment will start. And you just have to be. I find I just have to trust that it will eventually happen.
Yeah.
It's one of those things where I think sometimes the truth really is stranger than fiction.
Yeah, you're right. And there are so many of these true crime things where you think, well, my editor wouldn't let me get away with that. and yeah, it did actually happen. And the thing I find most interesting about them, which is why I'm sort of addicted to them, is not so much what happens, it's why. It's the motivation, because that's by definition in true crime, it did happen. So however outlandish it might appear now, however bizarre people's motivations seem, they did do that. It did actually happen. So that's what I find interesting. It's the why.
Yeah, I'm the same. So The Whole Truth is available to pre-order now. Mm-hmm. Is there anything that you can tell us? Any little sneak bits?
Well, you might have seen the strap lines on the front of it if you've seen the cover, and it's I do like to each book look at something very topical if I can. I mean, it's not, if I can't find it, it's not a problem, but it's really nice if I can take a very contemporary issue and explore it. And I think the best crime, I'm not saying that that's what I'm writing. But really good crime novels, I think, are a great commentary on the times in which they're written, and it's a genre which can actually do that very well, because it's dealing with people in extreme circumstances. So I think that actually does give you an interesting way in to look at some of these issues. And so I have done that in the past with other books, as you probably know. But in this case, it's doing a take on Me Too. So we're looking at the whole issue of sort of sexual harassment, and it is actually set in the university environment here, which I don't usually do much with, but obviously in this case it makes sense. But I've flipped it, and so the person who's alleging the incident that's happened is a man, and the alleged perpetrator is a woman. So it's the other way around, and she's the professor and he's the student. So it's a very interesting way of looking at all the sort of gender politics aspects of it, and who's telling the truth, hence partly the title, who's telling the truth. And in a situation like that, how do you work out who's telling the truth? Are the only people there were them? So he said, she said. So that's what I'm doing this time, and it was really interesting to do. I did enjoy doing it.
We for one, or we for two, I should say, can't wait. So are there any other future projects that you may be working on that you could tell us a little bit about? So anything that's exciting that we maybe haven't covered just yet? Is there anything on the horizons?
Nothing beyond the end of book 6 at the moment. So that's sort of beyond that, we're looking at I'm looking at hopefully having some time off on a holiday, but aren't we all? One of these days I'd love to write a standalone. It may be a while yet, because obviously I'm going to keep writing 40 books if people want to read them. I mean, obviously if it comes to a point people don't want to read them anymore, that's fine. I'm not going to keep doing it unless people want them. But one of these days I'd like to do a standalone, but I don't have a plot or anything like that in mind. And I do love, I know I've been slightly whinging so far about it's not very exciting at the moment, but I do love what I do, and I'm really lucky at what I do. And I love the whole 40 setup, purely by chance, because as I explained earlier, it all happened just for one book, but it's turned out to be something that's got legs, and the team are really nice, and I like bringing a couple of new people in and moving them around a bit. And so I'm very happy and very lucky with what I'm doing at the moment.
I mean, we love what you do. We can.
Oh, bless you.
A lot of our audience are aspiring writers, screenwriters. What advice would you give someone who's struggling trying to get their work out there?
Yeah, it's a very good question, and there's no, as it won't surprise you, there's no really a magic bullet answer to that. I think if you're a writer, you have to have a lot of persistence, and you have to grow quite a thick skin, and that's not easy. And you need it for lots of reasons, though. You need it because you're going to get people who turn your stuff down. Everybody has that, so and you can't afford for it to stop you working and stop you trying. You can't afford to be defeated too easily, so you need a bit of a thick skin for that. And the other thing you have to have thick skin for is that even once you're published, you're going to get feedback from different people, from your editor all the way through to people who leave you a 1-star review on Amazon, to say, you've got to change this, or it's not very good, or I don't like it, or and it doesn't matter how many times you tell yourself that it's okay, you're never going to please everyone all the time. It still sometimes gets to you, and I think that's a tough thing. And the way to grow a bit of that thick skin before you're published is to make sure you share your work with other people. Share it with people that know you, that care about you, who will try to help you and not just be gratuitously unpleasant about what you've written. They'll try and be constructive. But it does. I know a lot of aspiring writers who get very sort of possessive about their work and don't want to show it to anybody, which I understand. I actually completely get that, but in the long run it's not helpful, because you are going to have to open up at some point, and the earlier you do that, the easier it will be, I think.
Yeah, definitely. It's such a tricky one, isn't it? We have a few questions submitted online through by Louisa Calverley. And she asks, on average, how long does it take you to complete a manuscript, and how many drafts before it makes it to the printed page?
That's a very good question. I'm quite quick. Mine take about 4 months. First draft's about 4 months, which is quite quick. But then you're into the revisions phase. So I would do probably at least 2 more drafts myself before I would send it to my editor and my agent. And then we tend to do about 2 more goes around after that. So it's a bit like you think of a graph where you get to the point where you think, oh, well, I've finished, hurrah, it's at the top of the graph. And then there's sort of huge long tail after that, because even after you've gone through the bits with your agent and your editor, you're then into copy editing, and then you're into production, and then you're into, and so it takes actually, there's probably 6 months extra on the end of the 4 months I think I've finished. And but then there's, so any one time I've got a book in editing, I've got a book in writing, I've got a book in production, so you've got all the different layers of it, which are fun. They are fun, but it means you've got to sort of keep your brain as to which book am I talking about.
Yeah. I was going to ask, do you find it difficult then to go from, to get your head in one book and then know that okay, now you have to focus on this one in editing? And do you find it difficult to jump between the projects?
You have to be careful, actually, because especially with things like Adam Fawley's private life, things are happening to him. Say, for example, things are happening when I was writing The Whole Truth and All the Rage had just come out. There are things that are happening to Adam in The Whole Truth, which I absolutely shouldn't have said to anybody until the book came out. But people are talking to you about All the Rage, and if you're not careful, some of this stuff can spill out. And you think, oh no one else knows that yet. So that aspect of it is quite tricky, because unlike someone who writes the series of standalones, you can't segment your brain quite so easily because you've got the same characters. So yeah. It hasn't happened yet, but I think it nearly did a couple of times.
We have one more question from Louisa. It says, I'm an aspiring author, but often get caught up in anxiety when finishing the 3rd or 4th drafts. Have you any advice on getting over the fear of submitting your work? And how do you know when a manuscript is ready to be submitted and that any more changes will just damage the story?
Yeah, that last one is a really good point, because that's why I don't tend to want to do more than about 2 more drafts with my agent and my editor, because I think that you do get to the point where actually you're taking away rather than adding, and it's sort of wood for the trees moment, because you're so familiar with it, but other people coming in will not pick out that tiny little thing, so you can get a bit you can do too much editing, but generally, everybody needs editing. I will say that. I used to be employed. One of the things I used to get paid for when I was a copy editor was to edit other people's work. So I know what I'm doing, and I'm not bad at it. And I'm not bad at doing it for my own work, but I still need an editor. I absolutely still need an editor. And she's come up with both sort of small things which I've missed, because you always will, and quite big points which always pretty much turn out to be right. So I'm generally wrong about those, and she'll say, well, we should do this, and I'll probably say, oh, do we have to? Because I don't want to change everything, but almost always she's right about that. So everybody, however good an editor of your own work you think you are, everybody still needs somebody else. So, and I think the key, in answer to Louise's question, I think the key thing is to have a relationship with your editor where that you can trust them, not only in terms of their judgment, but that they are on your side and wanting the thing to be as good as it possibly can be, and it becomes a collaboration at that point. And if you can start feeling that you're collaborating with your editor rather than confronting them, as it were, fighting for the book, that's the best way to be, because then you are opening up again, what I was saying earlier about opening up. And I do understand feelings of anxiety about sending your baby out into the big wide world. No one's seen it yet. And I get that. I totally get that. And it's always a bit of a terrifying moment. But it's part of the process. And I think that's what I would say, in answer to the question. Accept that this is what's going to happen. You're not in the wrong feeling that way. It's completely natural, and it would be weird if you didn't feel that way. In a way, it would argue that you were too confident about the book if you weren't anxious about sending it out. So it's a good thing. It's not necessarily enjoyable, but it's part of the process, and you should just, take it for that.
Yeah, it's one of the, I feel I'm very much in the same boat as Louisa in that sense of sharing anything, of that, just that fear of not being quite up to like the standard and stuff. It's a really difficult sort of thing to overcome.
Yeah, but people, your editor will be on your side. Like I said, the editor wants you to be as good as you possibly can be, and they're just there to help you. That's the only way to see it. It really shouldn't be terrifying. It should be a bit alarming, but not, you should feel that you're in good hands.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you, Cara, so much.
I loved it. Thank you so much for inviting me.
It's been fascinating talking to you.
Yeah, very.
And yeah, we just can't wait for the future projects to come out and enjoy it. And yeah, just once again, just a huge thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
My pleasure. I'd love to do it again sometime if you'd like to. So.
Oh, we'd love to.
Sign us up.
Well, perhaps if we get the TV all sorted out and we've got an actor, we can come and talk about that.
That'd be wonderful.